Hold on, because today something truly significant unfolded in the complex and increasingly tense web of international relations, sending shockwaves through diplomatic circles and raising urgent questions about the future direction of Western alliances. The United States has issued a stark and unambiguous warning to the United Kingdom, with President Donald Trump cautioning in no uncertain terms that it would be very dangerous for Britain to pursue deeper business ties with China, even as London and Beijing move forward with substantial agreements aimed at resetting their bilateral relationship after years of strained relations and diplomatic distance. The warning from the American president came on Thursday, reportedly delivered on the sidelines of the premiere of the film Melania at the Kennedy Center in Washington. According to Reuters, Trump was asked to comment on British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's efforts to strengthen commercial engagement with China, and his response was direct, unambiguous, and impossible to misinterpret. "It's very dangerous for them to do that," the U.S. president stated, making crystal clear his administration's position on the matter and leaving no room for doubt about Washington's view of Britain's diplomatic outreach to Beijing. This warning arrives at a particularly sensitive and potentially pivotal moment in global diplomacy, one that could reshape relationships between major powers for years to come. Starmer is currently on a 4-day visit to China, marking the first trip by a British Prime Minister to the country in 8 years. The visit itself signals an unmistakable attempt by the United Kingdom to reset bilateral ties with Beijing, following a period during which relations between the two nations have been notably strained, marked by disagreements over trade, human rights concerns, and various geopolitical tensions. The British Prime Minister has brought with him a substantial delegation of nearly 60 British business executives and organization leaders, underscoring the commercial ambitions underlying this diplomatic mission and demonstrating the seriousness with which London is approaching this effort to rebuild bridges with Beijing. During his time in Beijing, Starmer engaged in what have been described as high-stakes meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two leaders discussed the development of what is being characterized as a long-term strategic partnership between their respective nations. This framing suggests an intention to move beyond the tensions that have marked recent years and to establish a more durable foundation for cooperation between London and Beijing. The use of the term strategic partnership is particularly significant in diplomatic language, indicating a relationship that extends beyond mere transactional exchanges to encompass broader areas of cooperation and shared interests. The visit has already yielded concrete results in the form of several significant agreements that represent tangible benefits for both sides. China agreed on Thursday to halve its import tariffs on British whiskey, reducing them to 5% from the previous level of 10%, according to Downing Street. This tariff reduction represents a substantial and tangible benefit for British whiskey producers and exporters, potentially opening up far greater access to the enormous Chinese market, which represents millions of consumers with increasing purchasing power and a growing appetite for premium imported spirits. Additionally, Beijing confirmed that it would implement visa-free travel for British nationals visiting China for periods of under 30 days. This measure is expected to facilitate considerably easier movement between the two countries for business travelers, tourists, and other visitors, removing bureaucratic barriers that have previously complicated travel arrangements. Beyond these government-to-government agreements, the visit has also seen major corporate commitments announced that underscore the economic dimension of this diplomatic reset. British pharmaceutical manufacturer AstraZeneca has pledged to invest a staggering $15 billion in China through the year 2030. This substantial investment will be directed toward expanding the company's medicines manufacturing capabilities in China, as well as enhancing research and development activities in the country. The scale of this commitment reflects significant confidence in the Chinese market and signals a long-term commercial strategy that extends well into the coming decade, representing one of the largest foreign investment commitments in China's pharmaceutical sector in recent years. Starmer himself has spoken positively and enthusiastically about the agreements reached during his visit. He hailed the agreements on visa-free travel and the lowering of whiskey tariffs as representing really important access, symbolic of what we're doing with the relationship. His comments suggest that these specific measures are viewed not merely as isolated deals or standalone achievements, but as indicative of a broader shift in the nature of the relationship between the United Kingdom and China, marking what could be the beginning of a new chapter in bilateral ties between London and Beijing. The diplomatic shift being pursued by the United Kingdom appears to mirror developments involving other nations, suggesting a broader pattern that is emerging across multiple Western capitals. Canada signed a trade agreement with China earlier this month, following a visit by Prime Minister Mark Carney. This move by Ottawa appears to represent an effort to diversify trade and investment partners, particularly amid persistent frictions with Washington over various issues including trade policy, border security, and broader strategic questions. The parallel between the British and Canadian approaches suggests a pattern among certain Western nations seeking to expand their economic relationships beyond traditional partnerships and to create what some analysts are describing as additional options in an increasingly multipolar world. Trump's comments extended beyond the United Kingdom to address Canada's engagement with China as well, and his language became even more forceful when discussing Ottawa's approach. According to Reuters, the U.S. president stated that it's even more dangerous for Canada to get into business with China. He added that Canada is not doing well, and that you can't look at China as the answer. Trump also made reference to his personal relationship with the Chinese president, saying, "President Xi is a friend of mine. I know him very well," before making a somewhat cryptic remark about ice hockey, stating, "The first thing they're going to do is say you're not allowed to play ice hockey anymore. Canada's not going to like that." The reference to ice hockey, while delivered in a seemingly lighthearted manner, carries undertones about cultural identity and sovereignty that resonate in the Canadian context. The U.S. president has gone beyond mere warnings in the case of Canada, reportedly threatening to impose a 100% tariff on Canadian goods if Ottawa proceeded with a trade deal with China. This threat represents an extraordinarily punitive measure that would effectively double the price of Canadian exports to the United States, potentially devastating key sectors of the Canadian economy. The threat also represents a sharp reversal from previous comments Trump had made, in which he suggested that such a deal could be a good thing. The dramatic shift in tone underscores the unpredictability that has characterized certain aspects of U.S. foreign policy under the current administration, leaving allies uncertain about Washington's position on key issues from one week to the next. Before departing for Beijing, Starmer addressed head-on the question of whether Britain would be forced to choose between maintaining close relations with the United States and developing stronger ties with China. In an interview with Bloomberg, the British Prime Minister stated clearly and definitively that Britain would not have to choose between the two powers. He expressed the view that the United Kingdom can continue to strengthen economic ties with Beijing without angering Trump or causing harm to relations with the United States. "We've got very close relations with the U.S., of course we want to, and we will maintain that business alongside security and defense," Starmer said in the interview, attempting to draw a distinction between different spheres of engagement and suggesting that commercial ties with China need not compromise security partnerships with Washington. Gabriel Wildau, managing director at political consultancy Tioneo, has offered detailed analysis on the challenging position in which the United Kingdom finds itself. Starmer is wary of alienating Washington, but the UK's squeezed position between the two superpowers is structural, not a quirk of the Trump administration, Wildau stated. His assessment suggests that the challenges facing British foreign policy in balancing relations between Washington and Beijing extend beyond the current political moment and reflect deeper structural realities in the international system. According to this analysis, the dilemma facing Britain would persist regardless of who occupies the White House or number 10 Downing Street, because it stems from fundamental features of the global order rather than from the personalities or policy preferences of individual leaders. Wildau has also suggested that a broad trade deal between the United Kingdom and China is unlikely at this stage, despite the positive tone of the current visit and the concrete agreements that have been announced. According to his analysis, Starmer is pursuing what might be characterized as a careful rebalancing of the country's foreign relations, rather than a structural reset with China that might attract unwanted attention from Western allies, particularly the United States and European partners who might view such a move with concern. This distinction is significant, as it suggests a calibrated and measured approach designed to improve relations with Beijing while avoiding actions that might be perceived as a fundamental realignment of British foreign policy priorities or as an abandonment of traditional partnerships with Washington and European capitals. The same diplomatic posturing, according to Wildau, applies to other leaders who might be described as representing middle power nations and who have visited China in recent months, seeking to navigate between the competing pressures exerted by the world's two largest economies. Since November, Beijing has hosted a notable and impressive array of Western leaders, demonstrating China's success in attracting high-level diplomatic engagement despite tensions with the United States. French President Emmanuel Macron made a visit, as did South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo, German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil, and Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin. The visit by the Irish leader was particularly significant, representing the first visit by an Irish leader to China in 14 years, marking a notable milestone in Ireland-China relations and suggesting renewed interest in engaging with Beijing after a long period of limited high-level contact. This flurry of visits by Western leaders appears to reflect a broader trend that is reshaping the diplomatic landscape. A number of governments, reportedly unsettled by Trump's unpredictable foreign policy approach and his administration's America First agenda, have been actively weighing the possibility of closer ties with Beijing, even at the acknowledged risk of provoking a negative reaction from the United States. The pattern suggests a degree of diplomatic recalibration taking place among certain Western nations as they assess their strategic options in a changing international environment characterized by great power competition, economic uncertainty, and shifting alliances. Wildau characterized the motivations behind these visits and engagements in specific and revealing terms. Rather than realignment, these governments are seeking optionality by creating issue-specific coalitions with China and each other to reduce dependence on the U.S., he noted. This framing suggests that what is taking place is not a wholesale shift in allegiances or strategic orientation, not an abandonment of the Western alliance system, but rather an effort to create additional diplomatic and economic options that might provide greater flexibility and reduce vulnerability to sudden policy shifts in Washington. The concept of optionality is key here, suggesting that these nations are seeking to expand their range of choices rather than to replace one set of partnerships with another. At this stage, the full implications of Starmer's visit to China and the agreements announced during it remain to be seen, and the coming weeks and months will be crucial in determining how this diplomatic initiative develops. The United Kingdom's relationship with both the United States and China will continue to evolve, and the extent to which Britain can successfully navigate between these two major powers, maintaining productive relationships with both, while avoiding being caught in the middle of their strategic rivalry, remains an open and pressing question. Trump's warning on Thursday makes absolutely clear that Washington is paying very close attention to British engagement with Beijing, and that the United States has strong views about the direction such engagement should take and the limits it should observe. For now, what is confirmed and beyond dispute is that agreements have been reached on whiskey tariffs and visa-free travel, that a major British pharmaceutical company has announced a substantial investment commitment in China worth $15 billion, and that the U.S. president has publicly and explicitly stated his view that it would be very dangerous for the United Kingdom to pursue business ties with China. The British Prime Minister has maintained consistently that his country does not face a binary choice between Washington and Beijing, while analysts have suggested that what is being pursued is a careful rebalancing rather than a fundamental realignment of British foreign policy. The situation continues to develop hour by hour, and it remains to be seen how the various parties involved will respond in the coming days and weeks as the implications of these developments become clearer. Further statements from officials in London, Washington, and Beijing may provide additional clarity on their respective positions and intentions. The international community, including other European nations, Asian allies of the United States, and observers around the world, will be watching closely to see how these dynamics evolve, particularly given the broader context of shifting relationships among major powers and the efforts by various nations to adjust their diplomatic and economic strategies in response to changing global conditions. What is absolutely clear at this moment is that the question of how Western nations engage with China and how the United States responds to such engagement by its allies and partners remains a live, urgent, and deeply consequential issue in international relations. The events of Thursday, with Trump's blunt warning coinciding with the conclusion of Starmer's carefully orchestrated visit to Beijing, highlight the tensions and competing interests at play in this complex diplomatic landscape. The fact that the U.S. president felt compelled to issue such a public warning to one of America's closest and most reliable allies underscores just how seriously Washington views these developments. The broader context makes these events even more significant. The international system appears to be entering a period of flux, with established patterns of alliance and partnership being tested and reconsidered. The question facing middle-power nations like the United Kingdom, Canada, and others is whether they can maintain productive relationships with both the United States and China simultaneously, or whether they will ultimately be forced to choose sides in what some observers characterize as a new Cold War between Washington and Beijing. For Britain specifically, the challenge is particularly acute. The country has deep historical, cultural, and security ties with the United States, formalized in the special relationship that has been a cornerstone of British foreign policy for decades. At the same time, China represents enormous economic opportunities as the world's second-largest economy and a crucial market for British exports and investments. Finding a way to balance these competing considerations without alienating either power will require skillful diplomacy and careful judgment. The agreements announced during Starmer's visit represent a test case for this balancing act. The visa-free travel arrangement and the whiskey tariff reduction are relatively modest measures that improve practical aspects of the bilateral relationship without fundamentally altering the strategic picture. The AstraZeneca investment, while substantial in financial terms, reflects a corporate decision rather than a government policy shift. Together, these moves signal improved relations without crossing lines that might provoke a severe American response. However, Trump's warning suggests that even these measured steps have not gone unnoticed in Washington and have generated concern about the trajectory of British policy. The American president's comments indicate that the United States expects its allies to maintain distance from China, particularly in commercial and economic domains that might strengthen Beijing's position in strategic sectors like pharmaceuticals and advanced manufacturing. The reference to Canada in Trump's remarks adds another dimension to this story. By threatening 100% tariffs on Canadian goods if Ottawa proceeds with its China trade deal, while simultaneously warning Britain about the dangers of Chinese engagement, Trump is sending a clear message to all American allies about the limits of acceptable engagement with Beijing. The fact that this message is being delivered to two of America's closest allies, both members of the Five Eyes intelligence-sharing partnership, underscores how seriously the current administration views this issue. As this situation continues to unfold, observers will be watching for several key indicators. Will Britain announce additional agreements or initiatives with China in the coming weeks? How will Washington respond if London continues down this path? Will other European nations follow Britain's example? Or will they hold back in light of American concerns? And perhaps most importantly, can middle-power nations successfully pursue what Wildau calls optionality? Or will they ultimately be forced to align more clearly with one side or the other in the US-China rivalry? These questions do not yet have clear answers, but the events of Thursday have brought them into sharp focus. The international community is witnessing a real-time test of whether traditional alliance structures can accommodate divergent approaches to China, or whether the logic of great power competition will ultimately force a more rigid alignment. The outcome will have profound implications not just for Britain, but for the entire architecture of international relations in the 21st century.